Some years ago, I was faced with a difficult case involving a guy who is about my age, and he was involved in a pretty serious motor vehicle collision. And he started having symptoms that I now know to be classic mild head injury symptoms. But he was undiagnosed, and all of his MRI scans and CT scans were normal, and people were telling him, hey, this is all in your head, you just need to get on with your life. And I became convinced that he had a brain injury, but I didn't know how to prove it. And his wife was telling me, his wife of 20 years, that he was different than he was before, and his friends and family were telling me that he was different than he was before. But again, I was faced with this problem I saw, which was that his medical scans, MRI and CT, were normal. And so the defense was saying, look, he has these normal scans, therefore there's no injury. And so I started doing a lot of research myself. I read 70 medical journal articles on subjects of neuroscience and neurotrauma and neuroimaging, and that's basically a fancy way of saying, brain imaging, until I found an article published by a scientist at the University of California in San Diego, who had a grant from the federal government to study all these blast injury victims coming back from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And until this time, these people that were subjected to, say, roadside bombs and would be subjected to blasts would come home and they would behave differently, and they would say, oh, it's just post-traumatic stress disorder, it's PTSD. And so he started studying them to see whether there's some kind of organic brain injury there also, because the blast wave, the concussive force of a blast wave, resulted in loss of consciousness in some of these people and was documented to show concussion, and a lot of the symptoms they were having is similar to the symptoms that you might expect from somebody that has a head injury and loss of consciousness, say, from a violent car wreck. And so they put him in this relatively new machine that would scan magnetic waves and electrical activity of the brain. It was a $5 million machine they had at this research facility. And he wrote an article showing that they were able to find abnormal slow waves in awake, alert adults when they would test them with this new machine. And so I thought, wow, finally here is a way to objectively show whether or not somebody has evidence of a brain injury. And so I actually contacted that doctor and asked him if he could test a civilian. Could he test my client? Could I send my client from Texas out to California? And after some thought and talking to the regents at the University of California, they agreed. And so we sent my client out there, and I paid for the pretty expensive cost of the scanning. And they had a bunch of scientists look at the results, and my client had very severe documented abnormal slow waves in this testing that they had done. Slow waves that they were able to show were caused by a traumatic brain injury, not by depression or something else. And so that in that case really cracked open that case. We ended up trying that case. That doctor in California ended up testifying in the case in Texas by videotape deposition. It became the first case in the country where that evidence was admitted in court. Since that time, that doctor I have heard has given depositions and evidence in plenty of cases. But our case was the first one in the country where that evidence was admitted. We ended up getting a record-setting verdict in that case. I still get asked questions about that case by lawyers around the country. And it's kind of a neat success story. And my takeaway from that is science, cutting-edge science always takes a little extra time to get into the courtroom. But lawyers who specialize in whatever the area need to be paying attention to whatever the cutting edge science is, so they can figure out if there's a way to use it in their cases.